Have you ever looked at the price tag on something, maybe your coffee or I don't know, on your phone, and just wondered what goes into that final number? All those like unseen forces. Or maybe you felt it in your own job, right? These global shifts happening, and you sense there's this whole complex thing going on underneath. Well, today, that's what we're doing. We're taking a deep dive into those forces, specifically tariffs and trade. Now, I know it might sound a bit dry, maybe some economic jargon, but really, this is a tool that's centuries old, and it shapes, well, pretty much everything in global commerce. It affects the price of your sneakers, international politics, you name it. So we've gathered a whole stack of sources, articles, research papers, notes on global trade, and we've distilled it down. We want to pull out the most important bits about tariffs, their history, their effects, and importantly, why they're suddenly so relevant again now. Think of this as your shortcut to really getting a handle on this key economic lever. Okay, let's unpack this then. What exactly are we talking about when we say tariffs? At the most basic level, right? Tariffs are just taxes. Taxes a government puts on goods and services coming in from other countries. Sounds simple, but it's actually one of the oldest tricks in the economic policy book.
It really is. And, they've played such a central role in trade for literally centuries. And to get a bit more specific, there are mainly two kinds you encounter. First, you've got specific tariffs. That's like a fixed fee per item or per unit, say $100 for every ton of steel imported. Simple as that.
Regardless of the steel's value.
Exactly. Doesn't matter if it's cheap steel or high-grade steel, the tax is the same per ton. Then the other type is ad valorem tariffs. These are different. They're a percentage of the import's actual value, so maybe a 10% tariff. On a, let's say, $30,000 imported car, that adds an extra $3,000.
Okay, so that one scales with the price.
Right. And believe me, these aren't just minor adjustments. They can seriously change how markets work.
What I find genuinely interesting here, it's not just what they are now, but how far back they go. You mentioned centuries, but we're talking ancient times, right? Empires were using them. What does that tell us?
It tells us they've always been about, fundamentally, control and money. Revenue generation, yes, but also controlling trade routes. Think Rome. Think ancient China. They used tariffs to manage who traded what and where, and to fill their treasuries, of course.
So it wasn't initially about protecting local industries.
Not in the same way as later. That really ramped up in the, say, 18th and 19th centuries. As modern nations started forming, you saw this rise of protectionism. Countries deliberately used tariffs to shield their own new domestic industries from competition from abroad.
Right, giving them space to grow.
Exactly. But here's a fascinating and kind of sobering twist. In the 20th century, especially after the Great Depression, that same impulse, protecting jobs with higher and higher tariffs, it actually backfired spectacularly. It deepened the global crisis.
Wow, so the attempt to protect actually hurt everyone more?
Precisely. It was a hard lesson learned.
And that hard lesson presumably led to, well, a different approach.
It did, eventually. It pushed countries towards international cooperation. That's where you get things like the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, which started in 1947. The whole idea was to lower these barriers gradually.
And JTT eventually became the WTO.
That's right. The World Trade Organization, the WTO, came along in 1995, basically to oversee and facilitate international trade on a much bigger, more formal scale.
Okay, so we have this system designed to manage trade, which is fundamentally just the exchange of goods and services between countries, right?
Yes, that's the core of it. And tariffs are this age-old lever used to influence that exchange. And when you reduce or get rid of those tariffs, what we generally call free trade, you tend to see some pretty clear benefits emerge.
Like what, specifically?
Well, first, there's economic efficiency. Countries can specialize in what they do best, their comparative advantage.
Makes sense. Play to your strengths.
Right. And that usually means lower prices for consumers for you because things are made more efficiently somewhere else. Plus, you get faster access to innovation, new technologies, new ideas. They spread more quickly across borders.
And jobs. I often hear about job creation.
Yes, absolutely. Especially in industries that are good at exporting. Those sectors can really boom. But, and this is the crucial but.
There's always a but.
Always. That openness, that competition, it can really hurt certain industries within a country, particularly those that just can't compete on price with cheaper imports.
And that's where the pressure comes from to bring tariffs back in.
Exactly. That's the flashpoint, the core tension.
So given those benefits of free trade, lower prices, innovation, efficiency, it does seem a bit strange, doesn't it? Why would a country choose tariffs? Is it always just about protecting those vulnerable domestic industries? Or are there other games being played?
It's often more complex than just one reason, but protecting domestic industries is usually front and center, shielding local businesses from, well, what they see as overwhelming foreign competition.
Okay, that's reason one.
Closely tied to that is protecting jobs, especially in sectors, maybe manufacturing or agriculture, that are feeling the heat from imports.
Right, the political pressure there must be huge.
Immense. Then there's a reason that's become much more prominent lately: national security. Making sure you're not too reliant on other countries for critical stuff. Think steel for defense or semiconductors or even medical supplies, as we saw recently.
Yeah, the pandemic really highlighted that vulnerability.
It absolutely did. Another reason is simple retaliation, tit for tat. Another country hits you with tariffs or engages in what you see as unfair trade practices, so you hit them back.
A trade war, essentially.
It can certainly escalate to that. And finally, particularly for developing nations, tariffs can be a straightforward way to generate government revenue, especially if their internal tax systems are less developed.
So a whole range of motivations there. Okay, so tariffs can look appealing, right? Like a quick fix. Protect local jobs, maybe get some revenue in the door, give domestic industries a bit of breathing room. But you mentioned earlier that it often backfires or has hidden costs. What does that bigger picture look like? What are the downsides economists usually point to?
You're right, the immediate appeal can hide some pretty significant negative effects. It's that ripple effect again. A tariff on steel, for instance. Okay, maybe it helps the big steel producers, but what about the company that makes specialized tools using imported steel? Their costs just shot up. They might have to lay people off or raise their prices.
So it's not just the direct import that's affected.
Not at all. More broadly, the most common impacts are higher prices for consumers, pretty much across the board. Things just get more expensive. You also get supply chain disruptions. Businesses that rely on imports suddenly have to find new suppliers or pay more or deal with delays. It causes chaos.
And the retaliation aspect.
Huge. Your trade partners don't just sit there. They often impose their own tariffs on your exports. So now your export industry suffer too. All of this tends to lead to slower overall economic growth, both domestically and globally. And of course, it increases tension between countries. It's rarely a clean, simple solution.
Talking about it theoretically is one thing, but you mentioned some real-world examples. Let's bring this to life a bit. What are some recent cases where we've really seen tariffs shake things up?
Oh, definitely. The most obvious one recently is probably the U.S.-China trade war, starting around 2018. The U.S. put tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, electronics, machinery, consumer goods,
And China responded.
immediately, with tariffs on U.S. goods particularly hitting agriculture hard, like soybeans. And the impact wasn't abstract. Think about American farmers losing their biggest market overnight, or tech companies suddenly facing much higher costs for components made in China. It caused major disruptions to global supply chains, raised prices, and created a lot of uncertainty.
A really widespread impact then. What else?
Well, another clear example is Brexit and its effect on trade between the UK and the EU. After the UK left the single market and customs union, new trade barriers popped up. Not always tariffs initially, but customs checks, paperwork, regulations.
Hurdles, essentially.
Exactly. Hurdles that added costs and delays. We heard stories of goods spoiling at borders, businesses struggling with new red tape. It created friction where there was none before, impacting businesses on both sides.
And you mentioned NAFTA changing.
Right, the transition from NAFTA to the USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. While the goal was modernization, the negotiations themselves were pretty tense, involving threats of tariffs, particularly around things like cars and steel, as leverage to get concessions. It really showed how tariffs, or even just the threat of tariffs, are powerful tools in international diplomacy and negotiation.
Looking at those examples, what really stands out to you? For me, it's how these things designed to target one area just spread out and affect so many others unexpectedly.
That's a key point. The interconnectedness means the ripples travel far and wide.
So tariffs are clearly a major tool, maybe a blunt instrument sometimes. But are they the only tool? What else can policymakers use if they want to manage imports or protect local industries, maybe without starting a trade war?
Good question. No, tariffs aren't the only option. There's a whole range of other measures, sometimes called non-tariff barriers. One common one is quotas. Instead of a tax, it's just a limit on the quantity of a good that can be imported. Like you can only import 10,000 tons of sugar this year, and that's it.
A physical cap.
Exactly. Then you have subsidies. These work differently. The government gives money to its own domestic industries. This helps them lower their prices and compete better against imports, without directly taxing the imports themselves.
Okay, supporting from within.
Right. There's also import licensing. Basically, you need specific permission, a license, to import certain goods. This adds a layer of control and sometimes cost or delay. And finally, a big category is technical barriers. This includes things like product standards, safety regulations, labeling requirements.
Things that sound reasonable, right? Safety standards.
Often they're perfectly legitimate. But sometimes these rules can be designed in a way that makes it really difficult or expensive for foreign products to comply, effectively blocking them, even without a formal tariff or quota.
Ah, a more subtle barrier.
Can be, yes. So there's definitely a broader toolkit available.
Yeah.
If you look at the broad sweep of economic thought, especially in recent decades, the general consensus, particularly among economists, has really favored lower tariffs and more open trade.
Why is that, given all the pressures we discussed?
Well, largely because of how interconnected the world economy has become. Think about global supply chains. Your phone has parts from maybe a dozen countries. Add in digital trade, e-commerce. It makes imposing old-school tariffs much more complicated and, frankly, disruptive. It's harder to target precisely, and the side effects are bigger.
Like trying to dam a river that now flows everywhere underground, as you said earlier.
Something like that, yeah. The complexity is immense now.
And yet, despite that consensus, we are seeing a definite shift, aren't we? It feels like protectionism is making a comeback.
Unquestionably, there's been a noticeable resurgence. You see it tied up with economic nationalism, geopolitical tensions. It's leading countries to rethink open trade policies.
What's driving that rethinking now?
Several things colliding, really. Recent global shocks have played a huge role. The COVID-19 pandemic starkly revealed the risks of relying too heavily on global supply chains for essential goods.
Right. The scramble for masks and medical equipment.
Exactly. Then you have the Russia-Ukraine war, disrupting energy and food supplies. And underlying a lot of it is the growing competition and strategic rivalry, especially between the U.S. and China. All this is forcing countries to reevaluate dependencies, prioritize resilience, maybe even bring some production back home, reshoring or friendshoring.
So security and resilience are trumping pure economic efficiency in some cases.
That seems to be the trend. And this brings up a really fundamental challenge. Tariffs and trade policies are actively reshaping global commerce right now. We know tariffs can protect certain domestic industries, but they almost always come with those broader economic costs we talked about, higher prices, retaliation, slower growth. So the real puzzle for policymakers is finding that balance. How do you support local jobs and strategic needs without sacrificing all the benefits that globalization has brought? It's a really tricky tightrope to walk.
And it seems like a tightrope that's constantly moving, too, with technology changing so fast, global politics shifting. It feels like the future of trade is going to require constant adaptation.
Absolutely. Adaptability, maybe more cooperation in new ways, and definitely some innovative thinking will be crucial. The old playbook might not be enough.
So let's leave our listeners with this thought. What does all this mean for you? Maybe the next time you buy something, anything really, or you hear a news report about a trade deal or a dispute, just take a second. Think about tariffs. Think about how this powerful, often invisible tool might have shaped that product's journey to you. And consider what those wider ripples mean, not just for your wallet, but for the whole interconnected world we live in.